I was just trying to think about, like what God's been teaching me this year as we sit down and film this. And I focused a lot of my devotions in the Old Testament this year. Actually, all of it was in the Old Testament. And there are a couple of like standouts and characters that I just love and look back and remember. And one of them I think of is David. And we did mention this, I think, a few episodes ago, but like in his affliction, he would complain and talk about it, but in the end he gave praise to God. And that's one thing that God's been teaching me is, although maybe this year hasn't been the year that you want it to be or what you expected it to be, there's always a reason and there's always room for you to give praise to God. And I think that's one thing that God has been teaching me recently, because it wasn't just David, like Job, he was afflicted and he was content to allow God to do his perfect will in his timing. And who else I wrote down? Leah, who married Jacob, and how he preferred her sister over her, and how she, was a bit disheartened about it. And then when it came to her fourth child, I was reading about the story and what the meaning of her sons meant. She named Judah, her fourth child, meaning to give praise to God. Whereas her first three children, she named them in light of her circumstance. But when she came and she realized and shifted her perspective on what God was doing in her life, she knew that, yes, this is all happening, but I'm going to give praise to God in it all and allow him to, have his perfect will in my life. So that's a couple of things that God has been teaching me and it's been on my mind.
That's so good. I as well have been in the Old Testament for most of the year, if not all of, I don't know, most of the year I've been in the Old Testament. And sort of my highlight, the thing that stood out for me the most, is just honestly the story of the people of Israel and how God just constantly forgave and redeemed them. Like, there's just there's so many times over and over. It's like, and God, forgave them of their sins, and then they walked with the Lord, and then a few years pass, and then they've forgotten the Lord's goodness, and they've gone back to like idolatry and serving other gods. And God then sends someone, he redeems them, and then they start praising God, and then they forget God, and then it's like this never-ending cycle, the Israelites and God just loving and redeeming them. And I honestly just feel like that for my life. Like, if I had, I thought about a word, like the one word that just constantly has come up all year for me is complacency. And it's just becoming comfortable in where I am, that I just start to forget. And then, God will send something or something will happen, and then I'm like, oh, I need to, go back to God. But I think of the people of Israel, and I think of my life, and I'm sure that everyone can sort of, align themselves with that as well and say, well, yeah, that's me as well, where, we go through these points in our lives where we're really close to God, and then, we'll get comfortable, something will happen, and then we spend a little bit of time apart from God, but then God's always faithful, and God's always, he's a loving God, and he always just brings us back and he forgives us. And so I think like while I can be so complacent, God is just so constant and like never changing. Yeah. And then if I was God and I treated, and people treated me the way that I treat God, because I would I'd forget them in a minute, I'd be like, oh, forget these people, like they're not worth my time or the effort. But thank God that God doesn't think that way of us, because he just wants us to come back to him. He's always there with open arms, which is just the biggest, I think, overall theme of my year, of what I've been learning.